So a really fun and maybe smart way to start a business meeting in a more creative way is by not rewarding people who show up late. Typically that's what we do by waiting for them. And so the idea of an unofficial start, which I picked up from Mark Collard, is this concept of as people are rolling into the room, how do you immediately design and set the tone for contribution and get them invited, participating, connecting in a purposeful, meaningful way. And so I've got a live group that's all milling out there waiting to come in. They don't know I'm about to do this. And I'm just gonna lead an unofficial start called word collisions. So imagine you've got two words. So I'm gonna invite everybody to just grab a word off of this table over here. Grab a word off of this table and sit down next to somebody and just share how their word relates or does not relate. You can add a little bit of flavor by saying, they could choose a random word or choose a word that feels particularly relevant or important to them right now in their current circumstances. And that's all we're gonna do. So it's just a rolling start as people are coming in. Those are the directions. Here we go. So I don't know what bad news Debbie spread about me yesterday, but I'm super excited to be with y'all. It's most of the time when I'm working with groups, I'm getting on a plane to go work with them, and there's usually about 2,500 instead of 25. And so I actually love being able to just hang out with you today. And the framing for our time that I want to open up with is twofold. So I have two clear intents. One is to share some nuggets and ideas and tools that actually shape the way that you work and have conversations with clients after you leave this room. And then I guess there's three intentions. The second intent is to experiment with what happens when we ask questions we typically don't. And so we're gonna do some experimentation with that. None of it is a life recommendation, it's just an experiment. What happens when you meet somebody and you don't ask where you're from, how are you, et cetera. And then the third one is Caleb. So Caleb's here. So this deck of cards that you're just using, 10 years ago, I created a deck of conversation cards because I was leading adventure trips with teenagers. So I was taking them caving, mountain biking, rock climbing. It's like a fun job in grad school. And when you get teenagers to pair up and talk with each other, it looks awfully painful. It's like, what do I do with my hands? And so I just asked myself the design question, like what could I just put in between these two people and help that go better? I had no intentions to ever create a second deck. It was just for me to solve my own little problem in this moment. Fast forward 10 years, that deck is in about every country on the planet, and 100,000 of them shipped all over the place and are starting conversations from organizations from the CIA to Crayola to Ameriprise, et cetera. And so the deck you have here is the sequel, and I'll frame up what the intention of this deck particular, because for the last 10 years, those conversation starters and all of my work writing a book called Ask Powerful Questions was really focused on connection and the power of what happens when you create connection before content, which I'm preaching to the choir. You all know this. If you try to give anybody any sort of financial plan and they do not trust you, you might as well hand them a bag of Cheetos and say good luck, right? And so, connections or questions have this profound ability to create connections, but they also have some other superpowers which I want to unpack. So that's a little bit of the framing. Here's our official start. When you meet somebody, and I know that all of you drove, maybe flew in to this space for today, when you meet someone for the very first time, what questions do you typically ask? Just shoot them out.
Where are you from?
Where are you from?
What's your name?
What do you do for a living? What's your name?
How's the trip?
What's the trip?
Where are you going?
Kids?
Beautiful weather.
Where are you going? How's the weather? Barry's going, we're already going right to the weather after question number 4, 5. This is interesting. So those questions are not bad or good, zero judgment on them, but it's just interesting that in a room full of, I haven't individually met you, but in a room full of, I'm gonna guess, some very smart, intelligent people, we tend to always ask one of the same 4 to 5 questions. Not bad or good, just an interesting observation of human behavior and psychology. And so because we're asked those questions a lot, too, our answers sometimes are rote. Like we get to plug in the tape and just let it play out. And so somebody's asked you, what do you do before? So there's my script, let it roll. And so in other words, I think that we're living in an age right now where answers are cheap. And this is especially obvious when you look at artificial intelligence. So I could type into ChatGPT, give me 5 ideas for my kid's birthday. It'll shoot back 5 ideas for my kid's birthday. I could also say, give me 5 ideas for my 4.5-year-old's birthday. We live in Pittsburgh. He really likes pirates. And give me 55 unique ideas with no overlap in between. And it will also give me a response. And so in other words, like this is very obvious when we think about artificial intelligence, is that our prompts drastically change what comes out. But then, as human beings, we roll up to a wedding, we find somebody we don't know. How are you? Where are you from? What do you do? We pull out the same 4 to 5 prompts. And so the question I want to ponder with you is, what would happen if we shift up those questions? So in a couple minutes, we're going to go through a series of exercises. And typically, I would not film or I would not lead all of these exercises. I don't know how much Debbie framed this up. I would not lead all of these exercises in a row with a group. But part of what we're doing here is filming some exercise tutorials that will be led to on the deck. So you will find yourself behind this deck teaching people how to use it at some point in the future. Here's the idea for the future focused. A few years ago, a mentor of mine named Mark asked me, just a little connection before content question before our meeting, asked me, what is something you would like to do more of? What is something you'd like to do more of? And my answer, it was kind of a busy day. It was like the 4th meeting I had that day. My answer was scuba diving. I grew up in New England, scuba diving for lobster. Love being underwater. I'm a swimmer, free diver. I just love being underwater. But I mentioned I had a 4.5-year-old. I have not been scuba diving in the last 4.5 years. And so I said, I'd love to do some more scuba diving. Fine, whatever. We went on the rest of our meeting, didn't think anything of it. It was like just a small little connection. The most interesting part about it is that about 6 months, almost to the date after Mark asked me that question, I was giving a keynote down in Florida, and I booked a flight early enough that I could go and dive. So 6 months after he asked me the question, I was underwater looking for shark fossils in Florida. And I came up and I said, holy smokes. There's a like 0 to 1% chance that I would be on this dive if Mark didn't bring this to my conscious awareness. And so in other words, the questions we ask people actually have the ability to materially change their decisions, right? This is super fascinating. As a bunch of advisors, right, when my financial advisor asked me, what's something you'd really regret not having done if you found out it was the last 6 years of your life? And I answered that question, and so now for the last 3 years, I'm like accelerating that path. How do I get to that place? Purely because brought some awareness to that idea and created some dissonance of saying, I'm living this life doing this, but here's what I'm saying I actually care about and want. So after scuba diving, that's an anecdote. I'm a little bit more data interested than that, and so I started doing some research into this. And there is a whole swath of research about this question behavior effect. So some of the more interesting ones are people walking by on a college campus. Hey, what is your intention to vote in this election? Just asking that question increases the chances that somebody votes by 25%. Whoa, okay. So let's raise the stakes a little bit. Voting, that's relatively easy. Somebody's walking by, what is your intention to give blood today? Increases the chances by 8.6% that somebody literally veers paths and walks into a blood drive. It's like, as opposed to just saying blood drive, blood drive, blood drive, questions are a particularly interesting tool that kind of turn on people's brain in a cool way. And then the last one, which I actually had to reach out to the researchers because I didn't actually believe it, was a consumer behavior study where they surveyed 40,000 people about their car buying behavior. And they asked the question, what is your intention to buy a car in the next 6 months? And in the group who was asked that question, and not the control group, they were 35% more likely to buy a car in the next 6 months, which is actually like slightly terrifying, actually. I had to reach out to the researchers because I was like, this has to be a typo. You mean 3.5%, right? Like, no, 35%. In other words, the prompts that we offer to people fundamentally have a way to change what happens next. And there's something that's kind of cool about that. And so all we're going to do today is mess with our prompts and see what happens. Because I'm going to be starting a bunch of conversations and ending them, I'm going to give you a way that I'll get your attention back rather than yelling over you. And it's through a quick story. So several years ago, I was leading a retreat with somebody else named Alexis. Wonderful, super smart entrepreneur person. And the retreat was for a bunch of young entrepreneurs. And this person came out, kind of social entrepreneurs, purpose, impact focused entrepreneurs. And this young guy came up to Alexis and was just like beaming with passion and excitement. He was talking about, I have this whole idea for like a global nonprofit, it's gonna end global poverty. He's like all over the place, like super, just passion eking out of his face. And Alexis looked back at this guy with just all the love in the world and just said, that's amazing. What are you gonna do tomorrow? It's like, don't worry about this. Like, what are you gonna do tomorrow to start on that? And I know that you're spending a whole lot more time today with each other than just with me. And so I just wanna leave you with that question. And just as a playful response, as a way of bringing back your attention, I'm going to ask you that question again, and you get to answer with your honest answer, something or nothing. All right, so I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do tomorrow? And you just call back something or nothing. This will be an easy, playful way to get your attention back in about 10 minutes when the room's a bit louder. Cool? What is something? What are you going to do tomorrow? Something. What are you going to do tomorrow? Something. All right, sweet.